So let's talk about trauma perception in the USSR. I've just been thinking a lot lately about how a lot of the ways I express myself is a sign of trauma. That does not mean that I think that interesting self-expression is always caused by trauma. Of course, that would be an oversimplification. But in myself, I have observed that a lot of the desire to have control over the way I am perceived has been caused by trauma. And that is because in the 90s, a lot of the children, myself included, felt like we didn't belong, like we didn't know what was happening, because the adults in our lives also didn't really understand what was happening. So we felt kind of lost. We felt like we needed to prove ourselves. So image was really something we paid much attention to. We kind of divided into all of these subcultures. And I know this wasn't true only for the post-Soviet countries. I know all over the world, young people try to discover their identities. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not bad or harmful in any way, but I feel like in my childhood, in my adolescence, this very heavy focus on what we appeared to be was very much to the detriment of our mental health. And a lot of the young people I knew were in quite a bad mental state. Many of them succumbed to alcoholism or drug addiction or some other types of addiction. Some pursued very unhealthy relationships, and yet others thought that their only chance at survival would be to move out of the country to a better place like Europe or the United States. And many of them did, and many of them didn't really find that solution that they were looking for. And personally for me, things like getting tattoos and piercings were of course a sign of rebellion, but also it was a sign of me trying to understand myself and kind of trying to get under my own skin and discover what I'm like on the inside. And because I've had skin conditions of all types since I was a little wee child, getting tattooed actually had a great therapeutic effect for me, because I felt like this skin now belongs to me. I can control what it looks like, because before, when I would just have bouts of terrible dermatitis, this is what people saw. They saw dermatitis. They saw a sickly child. And I did not really like that. I did not like to be perceived as a sickly child, even though I felt like a sickly child, because I was. But getting tattoos and kind of covering up my skin really helped me feel at home in my own skin, in my own body. And piercing, similarly, was a type of self-harm, I could say, that kind of made me feel powerful and in control, again, of my body and of the way people perceived me. And again, a disclaimer, I'm not saying that people who get piercings and tattoos, they're self-harming. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm just sharing my own personal experience. So don't take my words out of context, and don't tell every single person in your life who has tattoos and piercings that this must be true for them as well. And the tired old trope that if I was born earlier in the Soviet Union, I would be put in a gulag because of the way I look. This has always made me laugh. First of all, my material conditions would be so different. I would not have access to a lot of this. I would not be able to get as many tattoos and piercings professionally done. I would not have access to this type of accessories and clothes. And I would not really care as much, because you can't want what you've never seen. And I would argue that in the United States and in a lot of other places, people did not have access to professional tattoos and piercings and the type of accessories and clothes we have nowadays, because these are modern inventions. So saying you would be put in a gulag if you looked like this is similar to saying you would be burned at a stake because they would think you were a witch in the Middle Ages. Of course, the Soviet Union was way more progressive than the Middle Ages, arguably more progressive than the modern world, but this is just plucking something out of the modern world and putting it into the period of history where material conditions were very different. This would not have happened. If I was born in the Soviet Union in the 50s or even in the 40s, I would have a life similar to my grandmother's. And honestly, I would not mind that at all, because they had access to public housing, access to public healthcare, public education, and their jobs were meaningful. They really worked towards bettering the conditions for everyone. And arguably, they've had more fulfilling lives than many people have nowadays, because they worked at jobs they loved and cared about. They were able to have homes that they enjoyed and could decorate with whatever was accessible at the time. They could raise their children in relative safety, and they would would have dignity. If they grew older in the Soviet Union, they would have much more dignity. My grandparents did grow old in the 90s, so unfortunately for them, they didn't have as much dignity, but because of the foundation that they were able to build in the Soviet times, they at least were secure in their housing. They had pensions that were kind of a mix of the things that they did in the Soviet Union and what we currently do, which is mimicking the United States in many regards, which is not ideal. I personally don't really know what I'm going to do for my retirement because since I quit my job, I do not have a stable income, so I'm not sure what's going to happen to me. I'm going to probably need to find a job that is more traditional, which I don't really want to, but on the other hand, this is a necessity, a survival necessity. And again, I would not have to deal with that if I was born earlier in the Soviet Union. Of course, I would have other problems. Like, I would not have these type of cool shirts and cool earrings and cool whatever. Yeah, but I think I would be able to survive that. Like, this is not something that defines me. And this is referring back to the beginning of the video with trauma and perception. I think when you're very, very traumatized, you may care so deeply about the way you present yourself to others because you do not feel secure in yourself. Because deep down inside, you feel like you're not human enough. So you're trying to prove to yourself and others that you deserve to be treated as a human. But in the Soviet Union, you would be treated as a human. That doesn't mean that sometimes people would be jerks to you. I mean, people did not become some kind of magical unicorns all of a sudden in the Soviet Union, but that was just the beginning. We were just starting to build this huge, huge project. And if we were successful, if the Soviet Union persisted, I bet I would have even cooler shirts now. And I bet I would not worry about my retirement. And I bet that I would be even more useful to my community than I am now. And I would be happier and more fulfilled. And I would not worry about not being perceived as a human because I would be perceived as a human. And ultimately, whether you are perceived as a human or not does not change the fact that you are a human unless you are three cats hiding in a trench coat. But then maybe you're a human still. I'm not sure. Being human is not some kind of privilege. You're born a human just because of circumstances, and you should not prove your humanity to anyone. And building socialism and communism is a way to give people more dignity because it is human-centric. It is based on the fulfillment of all human needs, newly arising human needs as well. So when we achieve common prosperity, we are going to keep on looking further. We are going to keep on expanding our scientific understanding of the world. We would travel to space, etc. Yeah, we would have gay space communism or whatever people call it nowadays. But my point is we have achieved great successes in the Soviet Union. Of course, there were failures, as I usually say, but this was the first ever project of this kind. And no one in the world will be able to convince me it was not worth it. It was so worth it. And I wish we kept trying to build projects like this. And I know we will because the conditions surrounding us are getting worse and worse. And they're pushing us towards more radical change. If you have a question in good faith, leave it down below. Consider supporting me on Patreon. Do take care of yourself and your communities first. I hope you have a great day today, and I'll talk to you sometime later.